I moved back to Detroit in October, after 6 years in Grand Rapids trying to make a relationship work that was never going to work. I won't bore you with the details because this isn't about my ex-girlfriend or why she kept the apartment and I kept the cat. This is about the Marlowe Grand Hotel, and the phone calls, and what happened to Jess. But I need you to understand who I was when this started, because otherwise you won't understand why I almost said yes. I was 28. I had a culinary arts degree from a community college, $1,100 in checking, and a one-eyed cat named Diesel who bit me every morning when I fed him. I came back to Detroit because it was the only place that ever felt like mine, even though my childhood house in Mexican Town had been flipped into an Airbnb and my mom had moved to a senior community in Livonia. I needed a job and I needed it fast, and Ray Petrosian, who'd known my dad from the old Chrysler plant, put me behind the line at his restaurant before I'd finished my first beer at his bar. Ray's place was called Petrosian's, and it was exactly the kind of restaurant that sounds underwhelming until you eat there. 12 tables, a bar that seated 8, a kitchen the size of a parking space. Armenian and American comfort food, korovats, lamb shanks, a French dip that people drove in from the suburbs for. The menu was short because Ray believed in doing a few things well, and he was right. We weren't fancy. We were good. I worked the line with a guy named Tomas who'd been there 11 years and communicated primarily through grunts and spatula gestures, and that was the entire kitchen staff. Front of house was Ray himself and a woman named Jess Okafor, who was 26, finishing a social work degree at Wayne State, and the best server I'd ever worked with, not because she was fast, though she was, but because she paid attention. She remembered what people ordered. She noticed when a regular came in looking tired and brought their coffee before they asked. People loved her. I need you to remember that about Jess, specifically. That quality she had. Because it matters for what came later. Petrosian sat on a block of Michigan Avenue in Corktown where you could see the whole arc of Detroit in a single glance. To the east, new condos and a craft cocktail bar with Edison bulbs. To the west, 2 vacant lots and a boarded-up shoe store. Across the street, a barbershop that had been there since 1971. And at the end of the block, on the corner where Michigan met a side street called Clement, the Marlowe Grand Hotel. You've probably seen photos. Everyone from Detroit knows the Marlowe, even if they don't know they know it. It was built in 1924 by a hotel magnate named Everett Marlowe, and for about 40 years it was the kind of place where auto executives hosted banquets and jazz musicians played the ballroom after their real gigs. 15 floors of limestone and marble. Art Deco lobby with a ceiling mural of the Detroit River. 312 rooms, each one with a brass number plate and a rotary phone on the nightstand. The motto was engraved above the front entrance in letters you could still read if the light hit right: your every need, anticipated. It closed in 2001. Last owner went bankrupt. The city had been talking about what to do with it for 20 years and had done nothing, which is a very Detroit sentence. The ground floor windows were boarded up. A chain-link fence surrounded the parking lot. Pigeons lived on the upper floors and you could see them through the broken windows, sitting on the sills like little gray bellhops waiting for guests who'd never arrive. I mention all of this because I want you to understand that the Marlowe wasn't some hidden ruin in the middle of nowhere. It was right there. On our block. I saw it every time I took the trash out to the alley behind the restaurant. It was part of the scenery the way any old building becomes part of the scenery, you stop really looking at it. It was just the dead hotel on the corner. Until the night it called us. It was a Thursday in February. I remember because Thursdays were our slowest night and I was experimenting with a new soup, a roasted cauliflower thing with harissa that I was trying to convince Ray to add to the specials. Jess was up front folding napkins and probably studying, because she always had a textbook open on the hostess stand. Tomas had left early. Ray was in his office doing whatever Ray did in his office, which I suspected was mostly watching YouTube videos about fishing. The phone rang at 8:47. I know the exact time because I just looked at the clock, thinking about whether it was too early to start breaking down my station. Jess answered the way she always did, Petrosians, how can I help you? I wasn't paying much attention. I was tasting the soup. But I noticed when Jess went quiet for a long time, and then said, in this careful, polite voice she used when a customer was being strange, "I'm sorry, sir, could you repeat that?" She listened again. Then she looked over at me through the pass-through window with an expression I can only describe as amused confusion. She put her hand over the mouthpiece. "This man is asking for room service." "Room service?" "He wants a club sandwich, no pickle, with a side of tomato soup, delivered to room 414. "Room 414 of what?" "He didn't say. He just said room 414, like I should know." She took her hand off the mouthpiece. "Sir, I think you might have the wrong number. This is a restaurant on Michigan Avenue. We're not a hotel." She listened again. "Sir." "Hello." She hung up and shrugged. He hung up. I asked what the guy sounded like. She thought about it. Old. Polite. Like someone's grandfather ordering breakfast at a Holiday Inn. We laughed about it. Ray came out and Jess told him, and he said he once got a call from someone trying to order a pizza from what they thought was a Domino's, and we all compared wrong number stories for a while. It was nothing. It was a Thursday night in a slow restaurant and it was nothing. The number on the caller ID was 313-555-0414. The second call came the following Tuesday. Different voice, a woman this time, younger. She wanted sparkling water and a cheese plate delivered to room 722. Jess told her she had the wrong number. The woman apologized and hung up. The third call came on Wednesday. Room 1108. A pot of coffee, black. An older woman who called Jess dear. The fourth came Thursday. Room 206. A BLT and a glass of milk. They were always polite. They always specified a room number. They always asked for the food to be sent up or delivered, never brought over or dropped off. The language was specifically hotel language, room service language. And they always hung up calmly when Jess explained they'd reached a restaurant, not a hotel. No arguing. No confusion. Just a soft click. By the second week, I'd started writing them down. Not because I was scared, I wasn't, not yet, but because it was weird, and weird things are interesting when you work in a kitchen 6 nights a week and your social life consists of feeding a one-eyed cat and watching cooking competition shows alone. I kept a list in my phone, date, time, room number, order, approximate age and gender of caller. I told myself I was going to post about it online somewhere, make it a funny anecdote. The haunted restaurant that gets ghost orders. But then I got curious about the phone number. All the calls came from the same number, 313-555-0414. I tried calling it back one evening after close. It rang. Not a modern ring, a real ring, that mechanical bell sound, like an old rotary phone vibrating inside its housing. It rang and rang and rang. I was about to hang up when the ringing stopped and something else started. Hold music. Actual hold music. A jazz recording, something with a muted trumpet and a piano playing soft chords in a minor key. It was beautiful. Not Muzak, not a tinny recording, it sounded like someone was playing in a room with good acoustics, and the microphone had been placed just close enough to catch the warmth of it. I stood there in the restaurant's back hallway with my phone pressed to my ear and I listened. The trumpet carried a melody that felt like something I should recognize but couldn't quite name, and the piano underneath it kept shifting between major and minor in a way that made my chest tight. I listened for 7 minutes before I realized what I was doing and hung up. I stood there for a while after, in the hallway, feeling the way you feel when someone wakes you up from a dream you were enjoying. Disoriented. Slightly bereft. Like I'd been somewhere good and now I was back in a dim hallway that smelled like dish soap, and the hallway was the wrong place. That was the first time the Marlowe made me feel something. I didn't tell anyone about the hold music. I'm still not entirely sure why. The calls kept coming for another week. Same pattern, different voices, different rooms. Ray started getting annoyed. He thought it was a prank, maybe kids spoofing the number from a VoIP app. He told Jess to just hang up when they called. Jess did, but she told me privately that it felt rude. They're so polite, Marcus. It feels mean to just hang up on someone who's being polite. I agreed with her, and that probably should have been my first warning. By this point I'd done some basic research. The number, 313-555-0414, wasn't a real working number by any current carrier's records. I'd checked with a buddy who worked for a telecom contractor. He said it looked like it might have been part of an internal PBX system, the kind of private phone network big hotels and office buildings used to run. Each room had an extension, and the system routed calls internally and externally through a switchboard. When the building closed, the PBX would have been disconnected. No power, no service, no calls. Definitely not routing to a restaurant down the street. It's spoofed, he told me. Someone's using that number as a caller ID because they think it's funny. Probably grabbed it from an old hotel directory. That made sense. That made perfect, rational sense. But I suggested to Jess that we go check anyway. Just to be sure. Just to see. She was immediately into it. Jess was the kind of person who walked toward strange things instead of away from them, which was one of the best and worst things about her. We went on a Sunday afternoon in early March. The Marlowe sat on its corner the way it always did, gray and heavy, the upper floors stained with rust streaks where the fire escapes had corroded. The front entrance was sealed with plywood. The chain-link fence around the parking lot had a gap on the Clement Street side where someone had peeled it back, and we slipped through. We found a basement window that had been broken and covered with a sheet of plastic, and Jess pulled it aside and we dropped down into a utility hallway that smelled like wet concrete and old insulation. I'd been in abandoned buildings before. It's hard to grow up in Detroit without ending up in a few, but the Marlowe was different. It was big in a way that made the emptiness feel intentional, like the building had been designed to hold an enormous silence. We came up from the basement into the lobby, and I stopped walking for a minute because it was legitimately beautiful, even ruined. The ceiling mural was still there, faded and water-damaged but visible, the Detroit River painted in blues and silvers, with tiny boats and a sunset that might have been a sunrise. The marble floor was cracked and covered in dust and pigeon droppings. The front desk still had its brass fixtures, green now with patina. Behind it, rows of empty mail slots, one for each room, each one with its brass number. Room 414's slot had something in it. A folded piece of paper. I reached in and pulled it out. It was a room service order form, the old carbon copy kind, with "The Marlowe Grand Hotel" printed at the top in Art Deco lettering. Someone had filled it out in neat cursive handwriting: club sandwich, no pickle. Tomato soup. Room 414. Below the order, in the space marked "Guest Name," it read, Mr. Calloway. The paper was yellow with age but the ink was dark. Fresh dark. I held it up to the light coming through the boarded windows and the ink was so crisp it could have been written that morning. Jess took it from me and frowned at it. "Squatters," she said. "Someone's living here and messing with us." That made sense. We spent the next 2 hours going floor by floor. We made it up to the 7th floor before the stairwell became impassable. A section of ceiling had collapsed and filled the landing with plaster and rebar. We checked rooms, walked hallways, looked for signs of habitation. We found pigeon nests and water damage and a bathtub on the 4th floor that had a tree growing in it, a small maple that had taken root in the drain sludge and pushed its branches toward the broken window. We found graffiti and empty bottles and, in one room, a sleeping bag that was so old and moldy it basically disintegrated when Jess poked it with her foot. We did not find people. We did not find working phones. The rooms still had their rotary phones on the nightstands, but when I picked up the receiver in 414, there was nothing. No dial tone, no static. Dead plastic and dead wire. We found the PBX room in the basement, behind a locked door that Jess shouldered open with a confidence that suggested she'd done this before. Inside, a wall of ancient telephone switching equipment, rack-mounted, covered in dust. The main power conduit had been cut, not disconnected, cut. Someone had taken bolt cutters to the cables at some point. The whole system was dead. Had been dead for years, clearly. Spoofed calls, Jess said. Mystery solved. I wanted to believe her. I almost did. We climbed out the way we came in and walked back to the restaurant, and I bought us both coffees from the place next door, and we sat in the empty dining room and agreed that someone was pranking us with a VoIP app and an old hotel directory. The calls stopped. For 2 weeks, the phone rang only with real customers making real reservations. No polite strangers requesting club sandwiches for fictional rooms. Ray stopped grumbling. I deleted the log from my phone. Jess went back to studying and serving and being Jess. The Marlowe sat on its corner and I took the trash out past it and didn't think about it. It was over. I was sure it was over. The call came to my cell phone on a Tuesday night at 11:40 p.m. I was in bed. Diesel was on my chest, purring despite himself. I didn't recognize the number but I picked up, because that's what I do, I pick up. I've always been the person who answers the phone, who gets the door, who responds to the text. I don't know how to not respond when someone reaches out. It's a reflex that I used to think was a good quality. Good evening, Marcus. I sat up. Diesel hissed and jumped off. Who is this? Room 414, Marcus. I was hoping you might bring up some of that bisque I've been hearing about. The Friday bisque. I understand it's quite good. The voice was the same one from the first call. The old man. Mr. Calloway, if that was real. Polite. Warm. The kind of voice that makes you think of slippers and reading glasses and a folded newspaper. How do you know my name? You've been so helpful. The staff here speaks very highly of you. There is no staff. The hotel is empty. I was just there. A pause. Then, gently, of course you were. And we appreciate the visit. But you left before we could properly welcome you. These things take time. We understand. I hung up. The phone rang again immediately. Different number this time. I didn't answer. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. The message was a woman's voice, young, clear, professional. Good evening, Marcus. Room 722. I'd love a glass of that white wine you had on special last week. The Gruner Veltliner. Take your time. 2 more calls came that night. I let them both go to voicemail. Room 1108 wanted coffee. Room 206 wanted a glass of warm milk and asked if I could leave it by the door. I don't want to be a bother. I listened to each message exactly once, then deleted them, then sat on the edge of my bed with my phone in my hands and my cat staring at me from the doorway like he knew something I didn't. The calls knew my name. They knew what we served. They knew about the Friday bisque, which wasn't even on the menu yet. I'd only made it twice as a test batch, and both times it was just for staff. I called Jess at midnight. She didn't sound surprised. Yeah, she said. I got one too. Room 310. She asked for a grilled cheese. Jess. I know. I know. The phones in that building are dead. We saw them. I know, Marcus. We were both quiet for a while. Through the phone I could hear the sound of her apartment, the radiator clanking, her roommate's TV through the wall. The weird thing, Jess said, is that she sounded lonely. Like she wasn't really calling about the grilled cheese. She just wanted someone to talk to. The calls came every night after that. Always between 10 and midnight. Always to our personal phones. The voices were different each time, but they all had the same quality, a polite, unhurried warmth that made it hard to hang up immediately. They asked for food, mostly, but the requests started to drift personal in ways that made my skin tighten. Room 414, Mr. Calloway, asked for a sandwich like your mother used to make. Room 1108 asked if I could bring up the book on your nightstand, the one with the blue cover. Room 206 asked if Diesel was feeling better, because cats can sense these things, and he's been worried about you. I never told any of them about Diesel. I never told them about the book on my nightstand, which was a water-damaged copy of Kitchen Confidential with a blue cover. I never told them how my mother made sandwiches. I stopped answering. Jess didn't. At first she told me she was just collecting data, she was a social work student, she said, and whatever this was, whatever was happening, the clinical part of her brain wanted to understand the dynamic. She started taking notes on the calls, same as I had, but more detailed. She tracked speech patterns, vocabulary, emotional effect. She told me the callers exhibited high attachment behavior, and dependency signaling, and other terms from her textbooks that made the whole thing sound like a case study instead of something impossible. But then the notes stopped being clinical and started being personal. Mr. Calloway was a sales rep for GM, she told me one morning before our shift. Stayed at the Marlowe for 3 months in 1968 while he was going through a divorce. He didn't have anywhere else to go. He said the hotel became the only place that felt like home. Jess. You're having conversations with them. He's a person, Marcus. He's lonely and he's a person. He's a voice on a phone that shouldn't work, calling from a building that has no power. And that means he doesn't deserve someone to talk to. This was the thing about Jess. The same quality that made her an incredible server, that instinct to notice what people needed and provide it, was the thing that made her vulnerable. She couldn't not respond. Someone reached out, and she reached back. It was reflex. It was the core of who she was. I recognized it because it was the core of who I was too. Over the next 3 weeks, Jess changed. Not dramatically, not in any way I could have pointed to and said, see, this is wrong, this is proof. It was granular. She started wearing her hair pulled back tighter, more professional. She traded her usual sneakers for low black heels. One day she referred to the dining room as the lobby and corrected herself, but not quickly. She started arriving early and staying late, not to study but to polish silverware, to straighten the chairs, to make sure the salt shakers were perfectly aligned. She anticipated customer needs before they expressed them, she'd bring water before someone looked thirsty, deliver a check before they raised a hand. She'd always been attentive, but this was different. This was uncanny. Ray loved it. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it, he told her. I pulled her aside after close one night. When's the last time you went to the Marlowe? She didn't look at me. She was folding napkins into precise rectangles, each one identical to the last. Couple times. Alone. They're just people, Marcus. Stuck in a place they can't leave. Nobody visits them. Nobody brings them anything. The least I can do is stop by. What do you mean, stuck? What did you see? She finally looked at me, and her expression was patient in a way that made me feel like a child asking why the sky was blue. I mean, they're guests. They've been guests for a long time. And the hotel has been taking care of them as best it can, but it's not enough. It needs staff, Marcus. Real staff. People who care. Jess, that building is condemned. There's no one there. We went through it together. We didn't go above the 7th floor. She said it so simply. Like it was obvious. Like I should have already known. I started researching the Marlowe Grand in earnest after that conversation. Not online, the internet had the same bare facts everyone knew. Opened 1924. Closed 2001. Possible renovation, never materialized. Designated historic building, currently in legal limbo between the city and a holding company registered in Delaware. I found all of that in 10 minutes and it told me nothing. What I needed was in the Detroit Public Library's Burton Historical Collection. I went on a Saturday while Jess was covering my lunch shift, which she'd volunteered to do with an eagerness that frightened me. The Marlowe Grand had a deeper history than I'd realized. Everett Marlowe wasn't just a hotel magnate, he was an obsessive. He'd written a 40-page employee manual in 1925 that I found reproduced in a local history journal, and reading it was one of the stranger experiences of my life. It wasn't a manual so much as a philosophy. The opening line was, "A hotel is not a building. A hotel is an act of care. The building is merely the body through which that care is expressed." The manual described service standards that went beyond anything reasonable. Staff were expected to learn each guest's preferences within their first hour and anticipate future needs based on observation. The kitchen was to prepare meals that aligned not with what the guest ordered but with what the guest actually wanted, the deeper hunger, Marlowe called it. Room attendants were to notice changes in guests' moods and adjust room conditions accordingly: window angle, towel placement, the temperature of the room. The perfect hotel, Marlowe wrote, is one the guest never wants to leave. Not because they are trapped, but because they are known. To be truly known is the deepest comfort. It is the only one that never wears thin. The staff history was what really got me. The Marlowe Grand, according to employment records that the historical collection had preserved, experienced almost zero turnover for its first 3 decades. Staff hired in 1924 were still working there in the 1950s. Many of them had no listed home address. The employee record simply read Marlowe Grand in the address field. They lived there. They ate there. When a staff member named Florence Avery died in 1961, her next of kin was listed as the Marlowe Grand Hotel, attention, management. I found a Detroit Free Press article from 1978 about a fire inspector who'd visited the Marlowe and noted that several upper floor rooms appeared to be permanently occupied by individuals who were not on any guest register. When he asked the hotel manager about it, the manager smiled and said, "Those are long-term guests. They prefer not to be disturbed." The inspector asked how long they'd been there. The manager said, "Some of them were here before I was." The article treated it as a quirky local interest piece. Nobody followed up. When the hotel closed in 2001, the final owner told the press that the building had been empty for months, that the last guests had checked out the previous year. But a demolition assessment from 2003 noted personal effects in 17 upper floor rooms, clothing in closets, toiletries in bathrooms, books on nightstands. The assessors assumed squatters. The report recommended clearing the items before any work began. As far as I could tell, no one ever did. I sat in the library with these documents spread on the table and I thought about Mr. Calloway's voice on the phone. I thought about the room service form in neat cursive. I thought about what Jess had said, "They're guests. They've been guests for a long time." And I thought about Everett Marlowe's philosophy: the perfect hotel is one the guest never wants to leave. What if they hadn't? What if the building closed, and the power went out, and the staff went home, and the city moved on, but the guests stayed? Not because they couldn't leave, but because they'd been known so completely, attended to so thoroughly, that the outside world had become intolerable by comparison. What if the hotel had done its job too well? And what if the hotel, the act of care itself, the system Marlowe built, had outlasted the building's physical function? What if it was still operating, in whatever way it could, on whatever frequency it could reach? Still trying to anticipate needs. Still placing calls to the outside world, asking for what its guests required. Still looking for staff. I left the library and drove to the restaurant and walked straight to Ray's office. He was watching a video about fly fishing. "I need to talk about Jess," I said. Ray listened. "I'll give him credit for that. He sat behind his desk with his reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and he listened while I told him about the calls, the visit to the hotel, the personalized messages, Jess's changes. I told him about the library research. He let me finish. Then he said, "Marcus, she's working harder than she ever has. She's happier. Customers love her. Last week she got a 40% tip from a table of 6 because she remembered their kid's name from a month ago. That's not the point. What is the point? She's going to a building and talking to, what? Ghosts? Phone ghosts? I don't know what they are. Listen." He took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "I've known Jess for 2 years. She's a good kid. She's going through something right now, school, work, money, the stuff everyone her age goes through. If she's found something that helps her cope, and it's not drugs or some cult, I'm not going to tell her to stop. Ray, she called this place the lobby last week. She misspoke. She's dressing like a hotel concierge. She's dressing professionally. I wish everyone on my staff dressed that well." He looked at me, not unkindly. "You two are close. I get it. You're worried. But unless she's in actual danger, I think you need to let her be an adult." I left his office feeling like I was going insane. Not because Ray was wrong, by any reasonable standard, nothing visibly bad was happening to Jess. She was showing up to work. She was excelling at her job. She was happy. She was, by every measurable metric, doing better than she'd ever done. That was the thing I couldn't explain to Ray, the thing I could barely explain to myself. The horror wasn't that something terrible was happening to Jess. The horror was that something wonderful was happening to her, and I was almost certain it would kill her, and I couldn't prove it, and I wasn't even sure I wanted to prove it because part of me, the part that answered every call, that opened every door, that couldn't not respond when someone needed something, part of me understood exactly why she was going. I went to the Marlowe Grand on a Wednesday night in April. Alone. Jess was already inside, she'd left work an hour early, telling Ray she had a study group. She hadn't been to class in 2 weeks. I checked. I went in through the same basement window. The plastic sheet had been replaced with a clean curtain, hotel quality, heavy cotton, cream-colored. The utility hallway had been swept. Not cleaned, not renovated, just swept. The dust was gone. Someone had been taking care of the space. I came up into the lobby and stopped. The lobby was lit. Not with electric lights, with candles. Hundreds of them, placed on every flat surface, in brass holders that looked like they'd been polished that afternoon. The marble floor had been swept and partially restored, the cracks were still there, but the dust and pigeon droppings were gone. The front desk was staffed. A woman stood behind it. She was in her 50s, black, with her hair in a neat bun and a navy blazer with a small brass pin on the lapel. She looked up when I came in and smiled with the warmth of someone who'd been waiting for me specifically but hadn't wanted to rush me. "Good evening, sir. Welcome to the Marlowe Grand. I'm looking for Jess. Ms. Okafor is on duty. I'll let her know you're here. May I offer you anything while you wait? We have coffee, or I can send for something from the kitchen. Your kitchen doesn't work. You don't have power." She tilted her head slightly, the way you tilt your head when someone says something technically true but irrelevant. "We make do," she said. "We always have." She picked up the phone, the rotary phone behind the desk, and dialed a 3-digit extension. I heard the ring, that mechanical bell, echoing somewhere above us. She spoke briefly, hung up, and turned back to me with her hands folded. "She'll be right down. Please, make yourself comfortable. The sitting area is just through there." She gestured toward what had been the hotel's main lounge, a large room off the lobby that, when I'd visited with Jess a month ago, had been full of collapsed furniture and water damage. Now it was candlelit. The furniture had been arranged, mismatched, some of it broken, but arranged with care. An old velvet sofa. 2 wingback chairs. A coffee table with a folded newspaper on it, a copy of the Detroit Free Press dated March 15, 1987. A man sat in one of the wingback chairs. He was old, 80, maybe more, and thin, with a wool cardigan and slippers. He had a cup of coffee on the table beside him and he was reading a book. He looked up when I entered and smiled with a recognition that made my stomach drop. "Marcus," he said. "Finally. I hope you'll forgive the persistence. The calls, I know they were unusual. But we've been waiting a long time for someone like you. Mr. Calloway. Sit down. Please." I didn't sit down. "I'm here for Jess." "Of course you are. She said you'd come eventually. She's very fond of you." He set his book down, a Chandler novel, dog-eared. "You're alike, you too. You hear someone call, you come running. It's rare. Rarer than it used to be. What is this? What's happening here?" He looked at me for a long time with an expression that wasn't threatening or predatory or anything I'd expected. It was grateful. Purely, simply grateful, the way someone looks at a doctor who's finally arrived after a long wait. "The hotel takes care of us," he said. "It has for a very long time. But it's been hard, these last 20 years, without staff. A hotel without staff is just a building. And we're not guests of a building. We're guests of the Marlowe. Do you understand the difference?" "No. A building gives you walls and a roof. The Marlowe gives you everything else. It knows what you need before you know it yourself. It adjusts. It accommodates. But it needs hands to do it. Human hands. Human voices. It can't carry the trays or fold the sheets or sit with someone who's having a bad night. It needs people who want to do those things. People who need to be needed." He picked up his coffee and took a sip. "The calls were the hotel's idea, not ours. We just wanted someone to talk to. The hotel wanted staff." Jess appeared in the doorway. She was wearing a navy blazer identical to the woman at the front desk. Her name tag was brass, engraved, Jessica Okafor, Guest Services. Her hair was pulled back. She was smiling. "Hey, Marcus," she said, like we'd just bumped into each other at the grocery store. "I was wondering when you'd come by." "Jess, we're leaving." "No, we're not." She said it without anger. Without defensiveness. She said it the way you'd say, "No, the sky's not green," with the patience of someone correcting an honest mistake. "Come on," she said. "Let me show you around." She took me through the hotel. Not all of it, the upper floors above 8 were still largely ruined, she said, and there were parts of the building that were still waking up. But the middle floors, 4 through 7, were alive. Not restored, not renovated. Alive in the way a house is alive when someone lives in it and cares for it, even if the paint is peeling and the plumbing groans. Hallways swept. Doors standing open. Candles in sconces. The sound of footsteps and quiet conversation and, from somewhere I couldn't locate, that same jazz piano I'd heard on the hold music, playing something soft and blue. In room 414, there was a bed with clean sheets, a nightstand with Mr. Calloway's book and reading glasses, and on the desk by the window, a club sandwich with no pickle and a bowl of soup that was still warm. "Who made this?" I asked. "I did," Jess said. "I brought the ingredients from work. Ray won't miss them." "Jess. He's 84 years old, Marcus. He's been eating nothing for 20 years. He asks for a sandwich and you think the right thing to do is ignore him?" We walked the halls and she introduced me to the others. The woman from room 722, Diane, mid-40s, a former hotel employee who'd stayed after the closing and never left. The woman from 1108, Mrs. Park, who'd checked in after her husband died and found she couldn't face the empty house. Room 206 was a man named Gilbert who'd been a traveling musician and said the Marlowe was the only place that ever kept his room the way he liked it. There were others. 8, 10, I lost count. They lived in candlelight and quiet conversation and the inexplicable warmth of a building that should have been frozen solid in April but was temperate, comfortable, alive. They weren't prisoners. That was the thing I'd come prepared to fight against, and it wasn't there. No one was chained. No one was hollow-eyed or emaciated or begging for help. They were residents of a place that took care of them, and they were grateful for it, and they were lonely not because the hotel mistreated them but because it had been so long since anyone new had walked through the door. On the 5th floor, in a small office behind a conference room, a man was waiting for us. Older, maybe 60, with silver hair and a vest and a pocket watch, actually wearing a pocket watch, and an expression of calm authority that told me he was in charge before he said a word. His name tag read, Harold Vincent, General Manager. Marcus, he said. He didn't extend a hand. He just nodded, acknowledging me the way a boss acknowledges an employee who's arrived for an interview. Thank you for coming. Jess speaks very highly of you. I'm not here for a job. No. You're here for her. I understand. He sat down behind the desk and folded his hands. The desk had papers on it, schedules, inventory lists, all written by hand, all in the same precise handwriting as the room service form. But I'd like to make a case, if you'll hear me. I won't. You answer every call, Marcus. Every voicemail, every text, every knock on the door. Jess told me that about you. She said it's the first thing she noticed, that you can't not respond when someone needs something. She said you once drove 40 minutes to bring soup to a regular customer who called the restaurant to say she was sick and wished she could come in for dinner. He was right. I'd done that. Mrs. Fidel. She had pneumonia and she'd called just to hear Ray's voice on the voicemail, and I'd packed up a quart of lamb stew and driven it to her apartment in Dearborn because it didn't feel right to know she was hungry and do nothing. That quality, Vincent said, is what the Marlowe needs. Not muscles. Not skills. Heart. The willingness to answer when someone calls. We have guests who haven't been properly attended to in 2 decades. They're patient, they've always been patient, but they deserve better. They deserve someone who brings them soup when they're sick. He opened a drawer and took out a brass name tag and set it on the desk between us. Marcus Chin, kitchen staff. The letters were already engraved. The brass was already polished. Your shift can start whenever you're ready, he said. There's no pressure. There's never pressure here. The Marlowe doesn't take. It offers. All we ask is that you consider it. I looked at the name tag. I looked at Jess, who was standing in the doorway with her hands clasped in front of her, and who looked, I have to be honest about this, happier than I had ever seen her. Not manic. Not glazed. Genuinely happy, the way people look when they've found the thing they were supposed to be doing all along. And I felt it. The pull. I felt it in the same place I'd felt the hold music, in my chest, in that space between my ribs where loneliness lives when I'm not paying attention to it. The hotel was offering me exactly what I didn't have, purpose, belonging, the knowledge that I was needed. Not wanted, not tolerated, needed. The way a hungry person needs the cook. The way a lonely person needs the voice on the phone. I understood, standing in that office with the candlelight making the brass name tag glow, why every staff member in the Marlowe's history had stayed. Why the employment records listed no home address. Why Florence Avery's next of kin was the hotel itself. The Marlowe didn't trap you. It fulfilled you. It found the specific shape of your emptiness and filled it so precisely that leaving felt like amputating a part of yourself. The worst part was that it was real. The guests were real people with real needs. The fulfillment was genuine. Nothing about it was fake. Nothing about it was a trick. The horror of the Marlowe Grand wasn't that it was evil. The horror was that it was good, unbearably, perfectly, inescapably good. And once you'd felt what it was like to be part of something that good, the ordinary world, with its indifference and its unanswered calls and its lonely apartments with one-eyed cats, would never be enough again. I picked up the name tag. I held it in my hand. The brass was warm, warmer than it should have been, like someone had been holding it for me. Then I put it down. "I can't," I said. Vincent nodded slowly. No anger. No threat. Just a slight sadness, the way a good manager looks when a promising candidate turns down the offer. "Jess," I said. "Please." She shook her head. "I'm where I'm supposed to be, Marcus. I know you don't understand that. But I need you to trust me. This place needs me. These people need me. And I need to be needed. You know what that's like. You know exactly what that's like. The only difference between us is that you're still pretending the restaurant is enough." She hugged me. A real hug, tight, the way she hugged after long shifts when we were both tired and glad to have someone who understood. She smelled like candle wax and clean cotton and something faintly floral, like the soap in a hotel bathroom. "You can visit," she whispered. "Anytime. You don't have to stay. Just visit." I left. I walked back down through the candlelit hallways, past the sitting room where Mr. Calloway had returned to his Chandler novel, past the front desk where the woman in the blazer wished me a pleasant evening. I climbed out through the basement window and stood in the parking lot in the cold April air and looked up at the Marlowe Grand. The upper floors were dark. But on the 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th floors, I could see the faint flicker of candlelight behind the windows. In one window, I think it was the 5th floor, I saw a silhouette standing still, watching me. The outline of a pulled-back bun. A hand raised in a small wave. I waved back. Then I went home. Diesel bit me when I walked through the door. I was so grateful for his hostility that I sat on the kitchen floor and cried while he glared at me from the counter with his one good eye. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on my bed with the lights on and tried to understand what I was feeling, which was something worse than fear. It was grief. I'd lost Jess, not to violence, not to a monster, but to a place that loved her better than the world did. And the grief was tangled up with envy, because part of me knew she was right. Part of me knew that the Marlowe was offering something real, and I'd walked away from it, and walking away was the right choice, but it didn't feel like the right choice. It felt like leaving a warm house to stand in the rain because someone told you the house was on fire, only you never saw the flames, and the rain is real, and the cold is real, and the warmth is a memory you can't stop reaching for. The calls stopped after that. Not gradually, completely. My phone was quiet. The restaurant phone was quiet. No more polite voices, no more room numbers, no more midnight requests for sandwiches and coffee. The Marlowe had gotten what it came for. It didn't need to keep calling. Jess didn't come back to work. Ray was annoyed, then worried, then resigned. He called her phone and it went to voicemail. He texted. No response. After a week, he asked me if I knew what happened. "She got another job," I said, because I didn't know what else to say. "Where?" "Hospitality." He nodded like that made sense. "She was always good with people." I put an ad up for a new server. It was just me and Tomas and Ray now, and we were stretched thin. The ad went up on a Wednesday. By Friday, someone walked in. His name was Daniel. Late 20s, neatly dressed, resume printed on heavy paper. He said he'd heard about the opening through a referral. He didn't say from whom, and I didn't ask, because the moment he walked through the door, something in my chest went cold. He was perfect. Not good, perfect. He started that weekend and within 2 days he'd memorized the preferences of every regular. He knew that Mrs. Fidel liked her lamb stew with extra lemon. He knew that the couple who came in every Saturday wanted the corner table. He knew that Ray took his coffee with 2 sugars, even though Ray hadn't told him. He folded napkins into precise rectangles, each one identical to the last. He called the dining room, the floor, in a way that was almost right but not quite. It had the cadence of someone who was used to saying something else. He was attentive in a way that went past professional into something I couldn't name. He anticipated. He didn't wait for customers to need something, he provided it before the need arose. A glass of water refilled before it was empty. A fork replaced before the customer realized they'd dropped one. A check delivered at the exact moment the conversation at the table reached its natural end. It was beautiful to watch. It was deeply, fundamentally wrong. On his 3rd day, I saw him adjust the salt shakers so they were perfectly aligned. The same way Jess used to do it. On his 4th day, he was wearing black shoes with a slight heel. I recognized them. They were the same style Jess had worn behind the front desk of the Marlowe Grand. On his 5th day, I stayed late to close. Daniel was wiping down the bar, humming. The melody was soft, in a minor key, with a muted trumpet quality that lived somewhere in my chest, the same jazz tune from the hold music. The same song that had kept me on the phone for 7 minutes without realizing it. He noticed me staring and stopped humming. He smiled. It was a warm smile, genuine, the kind of smile that makes you feel like you're the only person in the room. "Can I get you anything before I lock up, Marcus? You look tired. Long shift. How did you hear about this job, Daniel?" "A referral." "I told you." "From who?" "Management." He picked up a glass and began polishing it. "They said you'd be a good fit to work with." I stood very still. "Management of what?" Daniel set the glass down. It was perfectly clean. Everything he touched was perfectly clean. He looked at me with those warm, attentive eyes, and for just a moment, no more than a second, I saw it. Not a change in his face. Not a flicker or a glitch. Just a quality in his gaze that I recognized. The same quality I'd seen in Mr. Calloway's eyes, in Vincent's eyes, in the front desk woman's eyes. The quality of someone who belonged to something larger than themselves, and was content in that belonging. "Get some rest," he said gently. "You're working a double tomorrow." "I'll handle the morning prep, I already know where everything is." He did know. He knew where the knives were, where I kept the backup harissa, which burner ran hot. He knew things I hadn't told him, the same way the callers had known things I hadn't told them. He'd been sent. Not by a person. By the Marlowe itself, extending outward, placing one of its own behind the counter of my restaurant the way it had once placed a folded room service form in the mail slot of room 414. The hotel wasn't just calling anymore. It was staffing. I went home that night and sat on my bed and looked at my phone. No missed calls. No voicemails. The screen was dark and quiet, and the apartment was dark and quiet, and Diesel was asleep on the radiator, and the only sound was the city outside my window, distant traffic, a siren, someone's music playing too loud 3 floors up. The ordinary world. The cold rain. I opened my nightstand drawer to plug in my charger and my hand touched something that shouldn't have been there. Smooth. Warm. Heavier than it looked. A brass name tag. Marcus Chen, kitchen staff. The engraving was perfect. The brass was warm the way metal gets when someone's been holding it, keeping it ready. And beneath my name, in smaller letters I hadn't noticed in Vincent's office, a line that must have always been there. Your every need, anticipated. I should have thrown it away. I should have dropped it in the trash and taken the trash to the dumpster and walked away from the restaurant and the hotel and the whole block of Michigan Avenue and never looked back. That is what a person who wanted to survive would do. Instead, I held it. I turned it over in my hands. I rubbed my thumb across the engraved letters and felt the warmth of the brass settle into my skin like a hand on my shoulder. And for just a moment, no more than a heartbeat, I thought about how it would feel to put it on. To wear a clean white uniform and walk through candlelit hallways and bring a club sandwich to an old man who'd been waiting 20 years for someone to answer his call. I put it back in the drawer. I closed the drawer. I turned off the light. But I didn't throw it away. I didn't throw it away.